Welcome to our series, Iran, the Untold Story, our deep look at the main Iranian opposition group. This week, we examine the vibrant Iranian American community or diaspora.
Since the Iranian regime took power in 1979, the people of Iran have conducted multiple mass uprisings, starting in the 80s with big street protests in 1999 and 2009. The Iranian people have challenged the support and legitimacy of the fundamentalists ruling Iran. But the popular uprising that began in December 2017 has been the most enduring. It's empowered vast sectors of Iranian society to resist nationwide. What started as an economic unrest has now spread to 160 cities, a sign of what Iranian government critics say could be the start of another revolution in Iran. President Trump has supported the anti-regime protests, as have Democratic congressional leaders. Meanwhile, the Iranian diaspora has strongly supported a democratic republic for Iran. It's held multiple events, particularly in the U.S., to declare solidarity with the people of Iran and their struggles. Thousands of them marched in Washington, D.C. in June of this year, supporting regime change by Iranians.
What we want to do is stand with the Iranian people, thousands of which gathered outside the White House on Friday, and tens of thousands of which took to the streets last year in communities across Iran. We want to stand with them.
While some predict the Iranian regime is too entrenched to collapse on its own, others warn that direct U.S. conflict could be disastrous, becoming another Iraq. NCRI President-elect Maryam Rajavi laid out a path forward: regime change by Iranians, empowered by resistance units inside Iran who are committed to toppling the government, despite the threat of death or arrest.
And we are joined now by a distinguished panel of Iranian American leaders. First, we have Dr. Ramesh Separad, a cybersecurity executive and author. She's an advisory board member of the Organization of Iranian American Communities, and her family was persecuted by the Iranian regime. Next, Dr. Firouz Daneshgari. He's a surgeon scientist and third chairman of urology at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Dr. Firouz is also a former political prisoner who was tortured under the mullahs regime in Iran. And finally, we have Professor Soolmaz Abooali, a former Iranian refugee who grew up in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Now she's a 12-time U.S. national champion and world champion in traditional karate. She also holds a PhD background and worked with the United States Institute of Peace. So you don't want to mess with this lady. Thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Soolmaz, if I could ask you first, you're all very distinguished, busy, have established careers. Why do you take time out of your life to try and raise awareness and assist to the degree you can with opposition to the Iranian regime?
Well, I take time out of my life because my life is pretty much built up on certain building blocks. And so one of those building blocks is the fact that my parents were imprisoned for speaking out for democracy within a dictatorship regime in Iran. Another building block is that I was forced to leave my extended family because of this kind of dictatorship setup. And additionally, I, being in my adopted homeland of the United States, I've had access to resources and opportunities that have enabled me to thrive. And I want the same for Iranian youth in Iran. And mind you that about 60% of Iran's population is comprised of young people 30 and under. So there is a real simmering potential there for positive change.
Dr. Daneshgari, what about you? Why do you take time out of your life to try and support resistance against the Iranian regime?
To watch the fight between the good and bad in this world. When I fled my country about 40 years ago, what I had witnessed as a political prisoner in the Evin prison, where I was seeing the devil naked in the eyes, killing, torturing, destroying the life and properties, I continue to see that over the past 40 years continue to Iran and also extend into the region, now under the suit of Foreign Minister Zarif and the uniform of Qasem Soleimani. On the other side is the resistance of Iranian people led by Ms. Rajavi, who despite all the problems that they receive from the bad side, they continue to keep the hope for the future of Iran, a prosperous Iran, and keep the hope for people like me who live thousands of miles away.
And what do you think about the time that you're spending on this issue? What brings you to actually help resistance against the mullahs in Tehran?
So my story is not different than what my colleagues have already shared. Both my parents were imprisoned by this regime for political purposes, and my sister, who was only 14 years old, was arrested. And even my adopted daughter, her father was killed in the 1988 massacre. So for me, I don't forget where I come from, and for me, standing up for democracy and human rights doesn't matter where I am. And I'm very proud that we're part of the Iranian American community that is on the forefront of advocating for a free Iran. So as Soolmaz said, we are at the brink of a very important juncture in our history where positive peace and positive change can happen in Iran.
Soolmaz, there have been a number of protests stretching back for years now, but post December 2017, people are saying that perhaps this time is different. First, why are the Iranian people protesting? What do they want? And do you think this is different? Are we heading for a different future for the Iranian people if this continues?
Yeah, so the bottom line is that Iranians want regime change. And so in December 2017 and forward, there has been approximately 10,000 protests and strikes where different factions that have been led by different factions in Iran. You're talking about teachers, truck drivers, environmentalists, women and youth, which really has shown that these protests are expanding, have expanded, they're enduring, and increasingly they're taking a political nature. And that's evidenced by them basically pouring into the streets and shouting things like "down with Khamenei," "down with Rouhani." And the Iranian regime really has no real solution, nor does it have the intention to really address these needs of the people, of the Iranian people in Iran.
Firouz, what would it take for there to finally be that tipping point moment where the regime would lose its authoritarian control over the state?
Continuation of the current foreign policy of President Trump because the time for change has arrived. Either regime has to change or change will come to it. The change will come to it by Iran's people. But the foreign policy has to continue the sanctions on the rest of the regime, on Rouhani and the rest of the intelligence ministry, the rest of the regime. That would make the breaking point.
Ramesh, on that point about foreign policy, there are some who are concerned, and this has been the case for quite some time, that the sanctions regime really just punishes the Iranian people and does not serve the purpose of changing behavior or even changing attitudes of the ruling party in Iran right now. What do you think about that? Is that something, a trade-off we have to make?
Oh, actually, I think sanctions are hurting the Iranian regime. And when you look at the situation in Iran, it is the Iranian regime that's hurting the Iranian people. And when looking at the political structure, looking at the economic structure, more than 70% of Iran's economy is in the hands of IRGC and the supreme leader. So the sanctions are targeting those. And I think the recent move by the administration to even sanction Ayatollah Khamenei directly was very positive. And I think, as Dr. Firouz said, we have to keep the pressure campaign on the leadership of the Iranian regime, because that's what the people of Iran have been calling for. And if you look at the protests, one of the slogans in Iran is, "Our enemy is here, they lie when they say it's US." So Iranian people are actually looking for more pressure on this regime in order to be empowered to bring this regime down.
Soolmaz, do you have concerns that even if the regime did lose power, that the country would become essentially an anarchy? It would be like Syria or Iraq. There are certainly people who would worry what the future of Iran would be without the regime in place just because of the power vacuum. Why would Iran post the mullahs be different from the civil war that we've seen play out in Iraq or Syria, where there were many, many hundreds of thousands dead?
Well, you have to look at the protests. So in December 2017, with the protests and the strikes that took place, and afterwards, there was no secessionist or sectarian slogans in any of the protests. And in fact, since 1981, the only viable alternative solution has been to the mullahs, has been the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which is a parliament in exile that has brought together a coalition of political parties, of religious and minority minority groups, and really has demonstrated their ability to have an inclusiveness and to create a nationalistic harmony when this regime comes down, and which is really just a matter of time.
Dr. Firouz, how do you feel about the prospect of U.S. or coalition perhaps, but U.S.-led military action against the Iranian regime in response to their threats to further enrich uranium, in response to some of the actions taken in the Persian Gulf? Do you think that military action is necessary? Is it a good idea?
I think the fear of war is something that the Iranian regime is spreading. I think, correctly so, Trump administration does not have the intention of getting into war, just wants to show its firmness in it says what it means. I think the Iranian regime will be toppled by Iranian people and its organized resistance without any military actions required by US. It's just a firm policy has to continue until the regime has felt the pain. They're still playing around.
Ramesh, do you agree?
I think what's really important in that question and what gets lost in the debate in Washington is that this regime has been waging war on the Iranian people since 1979 revolution. In fact, this regime has been waging war on humanity, looking at their terrorist activities in the region and what they've done in the Middle East. And they have tried to, through the appeasement policy, they have tried to normalize this as a behavior that's acceptable and making the entire international world to accept, well, that's just the way Iran is, or that's just the way Middle East is. We need to break that cycle. And that is why we support a movement that wants to end this war that has been waged on Iranian people and has been waged on the people of the region. And I think we have a chance to bring about a change that could break the status quo and bring a positive peace for the people of Iran and for the region.
Soolmaz, do you think that the leadership of the main Iranian opposition group, particularly Miriam Rajavi, and the 10-point plan that has been put forward by her and by her group has the framework? Does it establish the necessary framework for a post-mullah government in Tehran? And what is it about that 10-point plan that appeals to you or that makes you think that this could work?
Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan is really visionary, it's progressive, it's forward-looking, and it really is in line with addressing Iran's historic fight for justice and for freedom. Her 10-point plan basically includes separation of church and state, non-nuclear and peaceful coexistence, rule of law, free and fair elections, really all the, not to mention gender equality, all the building blocks, necessary building blocks of a true democracy. And I dedicated my gold medals to Mrs. Rajavi because she exemplifies all of these things in both her speech and in her actions. And for any athlete that knows, medals really represent blood, sweat, and tears, and that's what she does.
As we close out the series, Dr. Firouz, what would you want Americans to know about the Iranian regime and the opposition to it? If there was just one or two things that they would take away.
Very simple. The time of change has arrived. The situation is ripe. This regime has played all of its cards and is out of its cards. The continuation of the firm policy of President Trump must continue and extend. There's a viable alternative. As my colleague said, there is a parliament in exile, there is a government in exile, can take over the country tomorrow, has the backup of thousands of brain powers like us around the world, leave alone the 15 million unemployed youth in Iran who can start running the country and bring prosperity to that beautiful land.
Ramesh, same question to you. What would you want people to take away?
I think the message, Dr. Firouz said it very eloquently, the situation is ripe and there is a viable alternative, and the U.S. pressure campaign must continue, and in fact, not just symbolically, but it has to be implemented to its fullest. What we want sanctions against Iran's President Rouhani. What we want the blacklisting of the Ministry of Intelligence that has been the engine of spreading terror in the region. So with that, I think all of the ingredients will be at play to bring about change in Iran.
Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the last segment of Iran, the Untold Story. We hope you've learned a lot, both about the Iranian regime and the very active resistance movement fighting against it here and abroad. Thank you so much.